The Retro Football League presents The Extra Point. Powered by Wolverine Studios Draft Day Sports Pro Football. It's time to take the field. What are you bringing to the table? And now, for our host, Lance McAllister.
Lance McAllister. Good evening, football fans, and welcome back to another exciting episode of The Extra Point. I'm your host, Lance McAllister, bringing you all the latest updates and analysis on the Retro Football League, the RFL. Tonight, we dive deep into the action-packed Week 4 of the regular season where the teams battled it out on the gridiron. Big wins, shocking upsets, and standout performances await us, so let's not waste any time. It's time to get on the field and break down the games from this past week. Let's kick it off and get right into the action. The Atlanta Falcons traveled to Detroit to take on the Lions. The Lions started the game strong, with a touchdown in the first quarter and 17 points in the second quarter, taking a 24-10 lead into halftime. The Falcons struggled to find their rhythm on offense, only managing a field goal in the first quarter. They had a strong comeback in the fourth quarter, scoring 17 unanswered points to tie the game at 27-27 and force overtime. However, the Lions managed to kick a field goal in overtime, securing a 30-27 victory. The Lions' rushing game was the key to their success, with running back Horace King rushing for 139 yards and a touchdown on 16 carries. Quarterback Greg Landry also had a solid performance, throwing for 188 yards and a touchdown. The Falcons had a valiant effort, with running back Delvin Williams leading the way with 174 rushing yards and a touchdown, but it wasn't enough to secure the win. In a rainy contest between the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets, the Jets came out victorious with a score of 19-13 in overtime. Both teams struggled to find their offense throughout the game, resulting in a low-scoring affair. The Jets benefited from running back Steve Jones, who rushed for 103 yards on 24 carries, earning him the title of Offensive Player of the Game. The Bills had their own standout player in running back Tony Nathan, who carried the ball 37 times for 73 yards and also had 3 receptions for 19 yards. With both teams committed to a strong ground game, it was a game decided by small margins, and ultimately, it was the Jets who prevailed in the extra period. On the defensive side, linebacker Gary Spanny led the Jets with 14 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. However, no player was awarded the title of Defensive Player of the Game. The game was heavily affected by penalties, with the Jets being called for 85 penalty yards and the Bills committing 7 penalties for 45 yards. Despite the challenging weather conditions, both quarterbacks managed to have decent performances. The Jets' Phil Simms completed 21 of 26 passes for 189 yards and 1 touchdown, while the Bills' Glenn Carano went 13 for 29 with 190 passing yards. Ultimately, the Jets' ability to convert key plays and capitalize on opportunities led them to victory in a tightly contested matchup against their divisional rivals. The Cincinnati Bengals defeated the Houston Oilers with a final score of 18-13. The Bengals had a strong performance at home, led by quarterback Pat Ryan, who threw for 186 yards, and running back Charlie Young, who rushed for 49 yards. The Bengals' defense was stellar, with linebacker Tom Dinkel leading the team with 15 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. Their defense played a big role in securing the victory, holding the Oilers to only 13 points. Tom Dinkel was named the Defensive Player of the Game for his impactful performance. Despite the weather conditions of 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 8 miles per hour winds, and rain, both teams showed their resilience on the field. The Houston Oilers struggled to generate enough offense, as quarterback Dan Pastorini only completed 1 out of 2 passes for 39 yards. Running back Don Hardman had a solid game, rushing for 123 yards and scoring a touchdown, but it wasn't enough to overcome the Bengals' defense. The game remained competitive throughout, but ultimately it was the Bengals' strong performance on both sides of the ball that secured the victory. In a closely contested matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers defeated the Baltimore Colts with a final score of 19-16. The Steelers took an early lead, scoring 13 points in the first quarter and adding 3 more in the second. However, the Colts fought back with a field goal and a touchdown in the second quarter to make it a 10-point game at halftime. In the fourth quarter, the Colts managed to score 13 points, including a touchdown pass from Burt Jones, bringing them within 3 points of the Steelers. Despite their efforts, the Colts couldn't complete the comeback, falling just short as the Steelers held on for the win. Running back Bo Matthews was the standout player of the game, rushing for 176 yards on 19 carries and scoring a touchdown for the Steelers. QB Burt Jones led the offensive charge for the Baltimore Colts, completing 12 out of 21 passes for 88 yards and a touchdown. Unfortunately, the Colts couldn't generate enough offense to come out on top. Running back Franco Harris put in a solid performance, rushing for 98 yards on 21 carries. Defensively, Lee Nelson stood out for the Colts, recording 10 tackles and a sack. Despite their efforts, the Colts couldn't overcome the strong showing from the Steelers, and they were unable to secure the victory. Overall, it was a competitive game with momentum swinging back and forth, but in the end, the Steelers prevailed. In a high-scoring game, the Minnesota Vikings convincingly defeated the Green Bay Packers with a final score of 42-15. The Vikings dominated the game from start to finish, putting up 42 points on the scoreboard. Quarterback Fran Tarkenton had an outstanding performance, with 197 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. He also made an impact on the ground, rushing for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. Running back Chuck Foreman also contributed with 2 rushing touchdowns, while linebacker Fred McNeil had an impressive defensive performance with 15 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack. The Vikings' offense was firing on all cylinders and their defense kept the Packers' scoring in check, securing a convincing victory. In scorching temperatures and with a minimal breeze, the New England Patriots dominated the San Diego Chargers, securing a commanding 51-13 victory. The Patriots started strong, scoring 14 points in the first quarter and never looked back. Led by quarterback Steve Grogan, who completed 17 of 23 passes for 155 yards and 1 touchdown, the Patriots' offense was firing on all cylinders. However, it was running back Andy Johnson who stole the show, rushing for an impressive 184 yards on 25 carries with an average of 7.4 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. On the defensive side, linebacker Paul Naumoff was a force to be reckoned with, recording 10 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss and 1 sack. His outstanding performance earned him the Defensive Player of the Game award. The Chargers, on the other hand, struggled to generate offense and make an impact. Quarterback Dan Fouts completed 11 of 19 passes for 154 yards, but it wasn't enough to overcome the dominance of the Patriots. Running back Ron Springs was held to just 41 yards on 27 carries, with a meager average of 1.5 yards per carry. Ultimately, it was a one-sided affair, with the Patriots leaving no doubt about their superiority in this scorching hot matchup. The St. Louis Cardinals hosted the Washington Redskins in a game that ended with a final score of 21-14 in favor of the Cardinals. The Cardinals started strong, scoring 7 points in each of the first 2 quarters to take a 14-14 tie into halftime. However, in the second half, the Cardinals failed to score and the Redskins couldn't capitalize on their opportunity, resulting in a scoreless third and fourth quarter. This led to overtime, where the Cardinals managed to secure the victory with a touchdown, denying the Redskins any chance to respond. Running back Walter Payton was the offensive player of the game, rushing for 147 yards and scoring 2 touchdowns. However, the defensive player of the game was not awarded in this matchup. In a matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and Oakland Raiders, the Raiders came out on top with a final score of 34-21. The Chiefs got off to a strong start, scoring 7 points in the first quarter, but the Raiders quickly gained momentum, scoring 21 points in the second quarter to take a commanding lead. The Chiefs struggled to find their footing in the second half, failing to score any points in the third quarter. Despite a late touchdown in the fourth quarter, it wasn't enough to close the gap, and the Raiders took the victory. Running back Robert Miller was named the offensive player of the game, with 16 rushes for 110 yards and a touchdown, along with 3 catches for 25 yards. Linebacker Larry Keller was named the defensive player of the game, recording 8 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss, and an interception. The Miami Dolphins hosted the Chicago Bears in a low-scoring affair, with the Dolphins pulling out a 13-10 victory in overtime. The Dolphins took an early lead after a field goal in the second quarter, but the Bears quickly responded with a field goal of their own. The score remained tied until the fourth quarter when the Dolphins kicked another field goal to go ahead. The Bears fought back with a touchdown late in the fourth quarter to force overtime. In overtime, the Dolphins managed to kick another field goal to secure the win. Benny Malone was the standout player for the Dolphins as he rushed for 110 yards on 26 carries, earning him the offensive player of the game honors. Sanders Shiver led the Dolphins' defense with 10 tackles, including 4 tackles for loss. In a tightly contested matchup, the Denver Broncos hosted the Seattle Seahawks. The Broncos started off strong, scoring 10 points in the first quarter and maintaining their lead throughout the game. Norm Snead had an impressive performance, passing for 259 yards and 2 touchdowns. John Keyworth played a dual role, rushing 25 yards and catching 2 passes for 11 yards and a touchdown. The Broncos' defense was led by Bruce Elia, who had 12 tackles and 4 tackles for loss. The game ended with the Broncos narrowly defeating the Seahawks with a final score of 17-14. The offensive player of the game was not awarded to anyone, while the defensive player of the game went to defensive tackle Charlie Johnson, who had 4 tackles and 2 sacks. Despite the loss, the Seahawks showed strong efforts on offense. Jim Zorn passed for 174 yards, while Sherman Smith rushed for 59 yards on 23 carries. Ernie Jones led the Seahawks defense with 7 tackles. However, their efforts fell just short, resulting in the close defeat. In a high-scoring game, the San Francisco 49ers dominated the New Orleans Saints with a final score of 48-10. The 49ers started strong with a field goal in the first quarter, and their offense maintained momentum throughout the game. Quarterback Roger Staubach completed 13 out of 18 passes for 142 yards and 2 touchdowns, while also contributing with his rushing game, gaining 55 yards on 5 carries. Running back Otis Anderson was a force to be reckoned with, rushing for an impressive 163 yards on 30 carries and earning the title of Offensive Player of the Game. Despite an interception by the Saints' Phil Villapiano, it was not enough to overcome the dominant performance by San Francisco. The 49ers' defense was led by cornerback Ben Davis, who recorded 2 tackles and 1 interception, earning him the title of Defensive Player of the Game. In a disappointing performance, the New Orleans Saints fell short against the San Francisco 49ers, losing 48-10. Quarterback Archie Manning completed 15 out of 23 passes for 129 yards and 1 touchdown, but it wasn't enough to overcome the strong performance of the 49ers' defense. Running back Chuck Muncie had a tough time finding rushing lanes, gaining only 44 yards on 21 carries, with a disappointing average of 2.1 yards per carry. The Saints' defense struggled to contain the 49ers' offense, allowing a total of 482 yards. Linebacker Phil Villapiano was a bright spot for the Saints, recording 7 tackles and 1 tackle for loss. However, it was not enough to stop the dominant performance by the 49ers. The Philadelphia Eagles secured a victory against the New York Giants with a final score of 17-3. Despite the strong wind conditions at 23 miles per hour, the Eagles' offense excelled under the leadership of quarterback Joe Ferguson, who completed 16 out of 18 passes for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns. Running back Gary Davis contributed 48 rushing yards on 17 carries, but also had a fumble. Frank Lemaster led the Eagles' defense with an impressive performance, recording 14 tackles and 1 sack. Their dominant performance led to Offensive Player of the Game honors for Joe Ferguson and Defensive Player of the Game honors for Frank Lemaster. The New York Giants struggled to put points on the board, managing just a field goal in the first quarter. Quarterback Gifford Nielsen completed 10 out of 22 passes for 111 yards, but threw an interception. Lydell Mitchell led the Giants' rushing attack with 52 yards on 13 carries and added 5 receiving yards. Ted Hendricks was a standout defender for the Giants, recording 7 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and forcing a fumble. Despite their efforts, the Giants could not rally on offense, resulting in a disappointing loss at home. The Los Angeles Rams dominated the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a lopsided 38-10 victory. The Rams' offense was firing on all cylinders, with quarterback Jeff Comlo completing 7 of 8 passes for 91 yards and a touchdown. Running back Earl Campbell had a standout performance, rushing for 131 yards on 21 carries and scoring a touchdown. He was named the Offensive Player of the Game. The Rams' defense also shined, with linebacker Isaiah Robertson leading the team with 10 tackles and defensive end Al Baker contributing 2 tackles, 1 sack, and a forced fumble. Baker was named the Defensive Player of the Game. It was a commanding performance by the Rams in all facets of the game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a tough outing, struggling to find success on offense. Quarterback Danny White threw for 199 yards and 1 touchdown, but also threw 2 interceptions. Running back Wendell Tyler rushed for just 30 yards on 3 carries and had 1 reception for 5 yards. The Buccaneers' defense was led by linebacker Cal Peterson, who had 9 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble. Despite his efforts, the Buccaneers were unable to contain the Rams' high-powered offense. Overall, it was a disappointing game for Tampa Bay as they were outplayed in all areas by the Rams. The Cleveland Browns hosted the Dallas Cowboys in a one-sided matchup, ending in a dominant victory for the Cowboys, who won the game 51-7. The Cowboys started strong, scoring 28 points in the first quarter alone. They continued to dominate throughout the game, with quarterback Warren Moon throwing for 309 yards and 2 touchdowns. The standout performer for the Cowboys was running back Tony Dorsett, who rushed for 189 yards and 4 touchdowns, while also making 4 catches for 144 yards. Defensively, Randy White had a solid game for the Cowboys, with 3 tackles and 1 sack. It was a tough loss for the Browns, who struggled to find any offensive rhythm throughout the game. That concludes our coverage of Week 4 in the Retro Football League. It's been an action-packed weekend filled with thrilling games, unexpected upsets, and outstanding performances. Team strategies are starting to take shape, and surprises are in store for us as the season progresses. Join us next week as we dive into all the latest news, highlights, and analysis from the RFL. Until then, remember to stay tuned to The Extra Point for all your retro football updates. I'm Lance McAllister, and thanks for watching.